Welcome to Handle the Daily, where men who are husbands, dads, and entrepreneurs come together to conquer the day. This is more than just a podcast, it's a movement. Here we pursue the Lord, lead our families, and build the kingdom. If you're seeking conversations that delve deep, reveal truth, bring honor, and challenge you to become the man of God you know you can be, then you're in the right place. Join us as we journey together, setting our sights on legacy, forging ahead to build a better tomorrow. Welcome to Handle the Daily, where we conquer the day together to build legacy for tomorrow.
Hey everybody, welcome to Handle the Daily. In today's episode, I've got a really close friend, brother, Evans Duren, and today we're going to have a conversation around one topic. These episodes where we have this conversation around a topic or we're answering questions, this is where we really dive in, and it's not really necessarily getting to know who each other is, but it's really talking about things that we battle as husbands and fathers, and how do we overcome those? How do we do those together? And we're going to be talking about things that you may not always have even thought of, or maybe you're in the midst of, but hopefully in this conversation, you're going to learn a little bit about how you can take and apply this in your life. So welcome to Handle the Daily. And today's guest is Evans Duren. Today's guest is Evans Duren. Man, you would think I could get your name right.
It's only been 6 years, Chris, but that's okay.
Only been 6 years. But we've only seen each other 3 times in that 6 years.
Maybe on the 4th time we'll get it. But no, it's good to see you, brother.
Thanks, man. So we had an interview with you about being a husband, being a father, and you had mentioned that you had lost your father-in-law a little over a year ago. And so on this episode, we talked a little bit offline about how do you navigate your wife and kids through loss in the family, whether it's a parent, it's a friend, or whatever. But in this case, it was your father-in-law, Eddie, who had passed a little over a year ago. And Jamie, your wife, and her dad, Eddie, were very close.
Yeah, 100%, man. She is still a daddy's girl. But yeah, and he was a big figure in my life for 23 years.
And your boys loved him as a grandfather.
I don't know that my younger son remembers a Sunday when we weren't at their house, church, and then their house together. So yeah, it's been a huge void in the last 12 months.
Talk about setting the tone. So, man, for you, like you got kicked in the face as well, just like everybody else.
Yeah, and I'm writing down a note here because as we talk through this, there's going to be a lot of things that come to mind. So if you see me look away, Chris, just know I'm jotting down some thoughts.
No, you're good, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, man. He passed away unexpectedly, very suddenly. Mm-hmm. Without going through all the details, it was sudden, it was not. We didn't get to say goodbye the way you want to, and the things. I mean, death is tough, right? Hugging on my children, my wife, my mother-in-law, her brother, and praying, that day, it was just bad. It was rough. It was tough, right? It's hard. Going to the hospital and everybody going in, but me and the boys staying outside, and our pastor showing up to pray with us in the parking lot, things of that, man. It just, it's hard. And how do you respond as, you're not a biological child, but you're as close as you can get without being a biological child. And somebody who spends, 20 plus years of their life as a father figure, there's a lot of life together, man, a lot of life. So
you had known Eddie since you were 17.
Yeah. When Jamie and I started dating, and I remember going to her house and meeting him, and yeah, man. And I remember, you and I've talked about how she and I broke up 9 times in college and all that. And I still went to breakfast with him one morning and slid a ring box across the table and said, "Hey, man, I'd love to marry your daughter." He looked at me and said, "You sure?" I said, "Yes, sir. I'm sure. I promise you, I'm sure." But yeah, man, he was an amazing person.
Can you sum up your relationship with your father-in-law in just like a few sentences?
Um, he was a role model. He modeled Jesus. He modeled what it means. He said high bar to be a husband and a father. High bar's grandfather. He was a guy who, people talk about give the shirt off their back. He was that guy. He showed up when people needed him, and he did it without wanting any recognition. And I learned that he did that not just in his personal life, but also his professional life. He was extraordinary in a lot of ways.
So you said it was sudden.
Yeah.
What did that do for Jamie?
Oh, man, I think when that happens, you ask a lot of questions. I know I did.
Yeah.
But it's hard because it seems fine one minute, the next minute life has changed. Um, and that is one of the strong. She's one of the strongest people I know, Chris. She really is. She's tough. She's strong. But man, there's a picture we have. I'll put it this way. There's a picture when Jamie's parents, Eddie and Renee, they went to Mexico on a trip when Jamie was really little. And there's a picture we found of Jamie holding a maraca that they had brought back, and she's sitting in Eddie's lap. She's grinning ear to ear. Then there's another picture we found right behind it of her sitting in Renee's lap, and she's like frowning in the camera, like, "Can I please get off your lap and go hang out with my dad?" And so if that tells you anything, same maraca, same day, within minutes, same pictures. But man, that was he was a huge part of her work. Not that her mother's not. She and her mom have a great relationship, but I had people at the funeral and after the funeral say that relationship that my wife and her father had, I had women come up and say, "I've never had that with my father." And I almost envy the relationship Jamie and Eddie had because it was so special.
Yeah, I feel the weight of that, man, because like I have a close relationship with my daughter. And I mean, I've not been in a place where I've lost an in-law, but I've lost my dad 15 years ago. And man, there was so much I did not do well in that time of the loss. And so as you're walking through this, just a little over a year now, dude, how are you?
I'm good. I still have moments. And I say I'm good. Of course I say I'm good. I'm a guy. I say I'm good. Um, I still have my moments, man. Even talking now, I can feel it,
Yeah.
I made a promise to Jamie. I made a promise to her that I would never stop talking about her dad.
Come on.
She doesn't even know I'm doing this in the podcast today, right? She has no clue.
Wow.
But I told her, so I'll always honor and talk about him because it's the one thing I can do. I can always talk about what he taught me, who he was in my life, and also through my new company where I'm talking about what it means to be live sent and God sending us. I write about Eddie in the book, and it's a way that I want to kind of preserve and honor what he's done, right? Because again, I learned a lot from him in his life. Man, I've learned so much about him and life in general through his death. Almost as if it's another gift that he's given me that I wasn't expecting. So I'm okay. I still have my moments, and but man, I'm trying to honor him and make sure that his time on earth is remembered as a man who pointed to Jesus and lived it out.
So how far can I ask questions on?
As far as you want, man. I mean, yeah, and I'll tell you if something's out of bounds.
Okay. All right. Feel free to not answer a question though.
Yeah.
Okay. Like I'm just you're in the driver's seat here.
Yeah.
I'm just asking questions because this is something that I don't know many people handle well.
Yeah.
And so when it's a week after the funeral.
Yeah.
Where was Jamie?
She was trying to be strong for her mother. That's what she's in her son, our boys. It's amazing because we all like it's like everybody. How do you say it? Everybody tried to play a role in that time, if I can say that. Her mother is trying to grieve but be strong for her children and her grandchildren. Jamie's trying to be strong for her boys and for me, well, for me too, but for her mom and her brother. Her brother is trying to be the son, being strong for his mom and his sister, and I'm trying to be the one as a son-in-law. I feel like I'm trying to encapsulate everybody and do what I can to help however I can without overstepping boundaries. I mean, again, my brother-in-law, he is the biological son. It's his father. There's certain things as a man that I know he'll want to do and handle and whatnot, right? But I also want to make sure that I'm there to protect, guide, give whatever it is for the whole family, but also give my wife a place to fall apart because she's trying to make sure she's there for everybody else. And she's got to be vulnerable and fall apart a little bit too, right? So it's interesting, man. Everybody kind of felt like they were trying to provide the shoulder, but everybody needed a place to lean on the shoulder too, if I could say it that way.
At what point did you and Jamie and your boys just kind of sit in the weight of the loss?
I think it happened off and on throughout, and really throughout the last 12 months. I mean, February 7th was 1 year. And here we are a week or two out from that. So I think, or past that, there were plenty of times that we sat in it together, but there's a lot of times where, frankly, Chris, I tried to give them space to sit in it and try to pull them out at the same time. It's funny. It's like when somebody passes away, and I'm sure you could speak to this too, Chris. Like you would like the world to stop, but it doesn't. The world keeps turning, and there's responsibilities and things you have to do. So I found myself trying to take on those things to give them space. But I had to have my space too, right? So I think that's where it was. And my boys, I mean, they're young, man. They were 14 and 11 when this happened. And he was highly involved in their lives. There's a sign, you got to see it when you were here. They planted trees at the front of the property, like Christmas trees, like 2 rows of Christmas trees. I think it was back in 2021. And he had a little sign, Eddie had a little sign made, planted by Clark and Wyatt, December 21. So, I mean, he was highly involved and I'm grateful for that. But yeah, there's a lot of times we either fell kind of like needed to kind of, I say fall apart. That's not a great way to say it, but we would grieve independently and together.
No, I think that that's actually a valid term, bud. Fall apart. Like it's like for me, I knew that I was doing what you were saying that you've been trying to do. I did not give myself room to fall apart.
Yeah.
And it was probably 5 years had passed before I finally gave myself room to fall apart over the loss of my dad. And I don't have it figured out, but I know that losing my dad had such a weight and such an impact on me that, just like you said, how Eddie gave you a gift, like you had to grow up a little bit.
And it's funny, man, because I mean, I remember being that dumb kid, and or I think about being a dumb kid in his eyes. Maybe I wasn't. I don't know, but I laugh thinking about some things too. Where there was a time when I was 17 or 18, and we'd gone to the beach. I got to go with Jamie's family to the beach.
Mm-hmm.
I had these blue Oakley sunglasses, and I put my hat on. I had tons of hair. I don't have any hair now, obviously, but my hair would fly out, and I thought I had these really cool glasses. And I drove my '88 Bronco down to the beach, and I locked my keys in my truck at dinner. And Eddie had to come back and get us. And I was like, just little things like that. Or the time that I broke a key in the garage door, and I was like, Jamie, why don't you take the blame? She's like, nope. Well, Eddie left that key on that key ring for the next 20 years. He never took it off to remind, just little things that make you laugh, man. And but he was such a great guy. And I look back and think about how much I grew as a man and as a husband, knowing him for over 20 years. I mean, he saw me as a teenager. Man. He saw me as a young man who didn't have it figured out to a guy who had some stuff figured out. But I had the responsibility of being the head of a household where his daughter lived. And that was massive, man. And looking at that, I don't know how any father does that with a daughter. I mean, that's just a big weight. But I also felt like it's a lot of weight to carry as a son-in-law to make sure I gave her the space and protection and the life that she, that he would want for her. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense, man. And that's like what you have is, and what you had with Eddie sounds like it was an amazing relationship.
Yeah. And it's funny, man. I mean, he was the kind of guy who could be real quiet, and when he spoke, everybody listened. Now he'd also be the life of the party, but he was very much he would think before he spoke, right?
Yeah.
And I remember sitting with Jamie and being like, I think your dad hates me. And this was early on. We were like 18. She's like, what? And I was like, he doesn't say a whole lot. She's like, well, you talk a lot though, Evans. Like he's not like everybody's like, you and I get together, Chris. We talk and talk and talk and talk. Not everybody's like that. So,
No.
but yeah, man, it was incredible to watch.
So, can you share a moment where Wyatt, he's your youngest, right?
Yeah.
Where Wyatt just seemed like the grief was too much for him and you were able to just be there or get him out of it. Like, I'm sure I'm sure you had a moment like that, right?
Yeah, and it's different for the boys handled it differently initially, right? I mean, how do you handle loss like that as a child? The first time you experience something, you don't know how you're going to react until it happens, right? You can think something, but for him, I mean, there's been times Jamie's done a phenomenal job with him, so I'm gonna take it off of me for a minute, put it on Jamie. There are times where she'll have him at a practice or something. I'm running one direction with Clark, she might have White a different direction, and I'll get home and she's like, hey, he's struggling with this right now, and it's the hug or sometimes it's giving him space,
Mm-hmm.
allowing my boys to know, hey, this is part of the grieving process, and if you need a minute, if you want to take a baseball bat outside and hit a tree, or if you want to sit here and just squeeze me tight and cry my arms, we can make the space for it. There is no one way to grieve, or right way or wrong way. It's grief. Um, so, man, with him, it's interesting because again, at 12 years old, 11 at the time it happened, I'm like, I don't know that he remembers a time when Eddie wasn't a part of his life, if that makes sense.
That makes complete sense.
Yeah. So it's
So,
I think
what about with Clark, man?
Clark. The day it happened, I remember there were a couple scenarios where I'd grab Clark and I'd just say, "Squeeze, man, just squeeze as hard as you can," and he would just squeeze, and that was an outlet for him. And he's tough, man. I don't know if maybe it's the age piece. Maybe it's the bigger brother, the oldest brother. I mean, I'm the oldest of four boys. Maybe that's part of it too, where he carries it a little bit differently. And I think, and I've never asked him, but I might would suggest that maybe part of it too is that responsibility, being the older brother, looking out for the younger one, trying to care about him. That's where I said at the beginning of this episode, where we all had a role to play. I think maybe Clark kind of started taking on that role for Wyatt, and I didn't realize it.
So when you were being the dad that just was there in those moments of both your sons grieving, how are you, man? Like, were you, I'm sure you were grieving with them, but how did going through those moments of like, wow, this little dude has got this going on. How did you, detaching from what you were dealing with, to be their dad, also bring you a measure of healing through this process?
It's wild to me. You remember when you first had a child and they said, well, you'll never really understand what it's like to be a parent until you're a parent, right? And like people can tell you all day long, and until you have a child, you don't know. Like you can't explain it to somebody.
No, for dads, the switch gets flipped the moment the kid comes out. Like the mom has 9 months to build the relationship.
Right. But so you understand that. That was my next comment, is it's weird because then you're a parent and you just go. Like there's something in the nature that just happens, right? In your DNA.
Yeah.
It was odd, man, because with the boys, when I saw them hurt, I felt like I was able to compartmentalize or separate myself long enough to be dad for them first, and kind of take that on right away. And I wanted them to be okay, and I'd worry about me second, kind of thing, right? Doesn't mean I wasn't grieving or having my own way of grieving, but trying to give them that space first was so important, man. And I'm not saying it was right or wrong; it's just the way it happened. But I felt like it was okay. We're in a situation, we have to confront it, and we have to be head on, and I can't change it. We had a lot of those conversations about not being able to change things either. So how do you handle, and I don't like the term deal with, because I don't want it to sound flippant, but you have to deal with the fact that there is loss.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of conversation about, in our loss, heaven's gain. How do we discuss that too? because I believe that. And we had a lot of conversations of, if we believe that to be true, then we have to live that here too in our grief, right?
Well, it's like Revelations 21:4. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. I would go back to that scripture in the times I've lost people. And I'm just like, especially with my dad, I felt robbed. And I'm sure Jamie, in a way, felt the same way, because with my dad, it was abrupt, not as abrupt as her dad passing, but it was he was healthy, and then 20 days later, he's gone.
Yeah. And I think there's something about, we measure things in time, Chris. And when you measure in time, you feel shorted.
Yeah, you do. Because like what we talked about in your episode is, we only get this one life to do what this is. And the reason we have time is to put a value on how precious it is. And we have this moment that we're in right now to either decide we're going to stay stuck, or we're going to get off our butts and move forward with the Lord. But yeah, I mean, I think people don't talk enough about the loss of a family member, whether it was a good relationship or not, doesn't matter. It's still the loss of a family member. And there's ripple effects that happen in that.
Well, and I think too, people talk about time, and I can tell you, man, I think you come to a realization, like I said, I mean, in the first days, there's just shock, in our situation, shock. Um, and then I think you go through all the emotions of questioning. You have anger, you have, you miss, you anger, you question, you try to turn away and think about something else. I mean, there's a lot of things that happen right during that process. But the reality is, like I said earlier, life continues. And what I think we found, and we talk about in our house too, is Eddie. We believe in heaven. We believe that Eddie was a man of God. Mm-hmm. We'll see him again, right? And I believe that, and it's easy to say this, and I say this to people a lot when they've lost someone. There is this beautiful tension in death, in that it hurts us so badly. But how great is God that we have an opportunity to be in eternity with him in heaven. And so, like, this gift of God, that when we die, there is something so much more than we can comprehend, that he's prepared for those who love him and know him, right? And it's easy to say, it's hard to believe it or feel it maybe in the moment. But I think there's so much truth in that, man. And I've wondered about it. What is Eddie doing in heaven? And the Bible talks about, seeing people and knowing each other, brothers and sisters. And I'm like, man, there's so many people who've gone before him. Like, for me, man, secretly, I'm sitting here hoping that he's hanging out or seeing and talking with people. And, I don't know, man. I can't fully comprehend. And Jamie and Renee have really taken a dive into heaven and some things and studying. But for me, I'm like, is he there talking to his father, Jamie's grandfather, my grandmother? Do they get to see each? Is there a welcoming party? I don't know, man. But it gives me a lot of excitement and hope that, again, this hurts us, but man, what a day for them.
Exactly. It's a celebration. So you mentioned that even in death, Eddie gave you a great gift. Can you share a little bit about what that is?
So I wrote about Eddie in my book, right? I wrote a book called Send Me, about faith and work. And I started writing the book in November of 2022. Yeah, that one right there, buddy. And I wrote about Eddie, and we talked about, like, the timeline of life and our story within the story. It was Christmas time, and I talked about how we're sitting at Jamie's parents' house, and Eddie was retiring and celebrating a birthday that month in December. And there's this new life ahead of him that had nothing to do with what he'd done for 40 plus years. And then we also had Jamie's cousin and their baby. Like, so you have this whole circle of life kind of moment. Well, fast forward 6 weeks and Eddie passes away. And then I wrote about him again and about his career a little bit and his life in a different way that I'd never seen. So to kind of expand on it, at his funeral, a lady walked up to me and Jamie, and we were kind of in the visitation line. And she said, Jamie, I know you don't remember me. Last time I saw you, you were this big. She put her hands like this far, like a newborn. And she goes, I worked with your dad in the early 80s. And I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, that's 40 years ago. And this lady showed up to pay respects to Jamie's father, my father-in-law, 40 years later. And I'm going, he didn't work for that company past like mid 80s, I believe. So to think of him as a young man in his late 20s, early 30s, having an impact on the people he worked with, that 40 years later are coming to pay respects and tell the family how much he meant to them 40 years ago, blew my mind. And she's not the only one who showed up from customers, business partners, things of that nature. And then before he passed away, before he retired, he was nominated for the South Carolina. I may not say this correctly, but South Carolina's Land Surveyor Association. He did civil engineering. He sold surveying equipment. He loved his customers, man. Customers loved him. He was nominated for the Lifetime Service Award and was voted and received it. And this was all before he passed away. They were nominating him already. And so he was going to receive the award. And they had their convention for the state, their big conference, and they asked our family to come accept the award for Eddie. And so I go in this conference center, and I mean, I've got one or two grown men crying as they talk to my mother-in-law about Eddie as we walk in. I mean, lots of hugs and tears, man. And they put us at this table at the front, and the gentleman, I think he's president of the group, called my brother-in-law up, and there's a standing ovation for him. And you're talking about a couple hundred people standing, and I mean, I'm seeing tears, I'm seeing clapping, and they gave him the Lifetime Service Award plaque to my brother-in-law, accepted it, and it's said a few words. And there's a scholarship created in Eddie's honor too for this association. So to hear the stories that came in at his funeral, to hear the people who came by the house to talk about him, to see the impact he had on his clients and customers, like firsthand, to see them, man, it was incredible to see how his work mattered, not just in the paycheck side, not just in the ability to take care of clients and, transactionally when they needed things, but to see how his work impacted people and how he shared the gospel, whether he said the name of Jesus or whether he just lived it out. It was incredible. And there was one more. There was a customer of his for a long time, a client, and they had a bulletin board full of like family pictures. Eddie's picture was the only non-family member allowed on the bulletin board. And you're talking about 20 years. So, man, he's a special guy. And he did a lot of things that I would have never seen because I wasn't a part of his work. But it was incredible to see that as people came to honor him.
Well, man, you have walked through a tough year, because when you're going through that first year of loss, there's you have the daily reminder of, like, if this was a person you called daily, you have the first holidays, the first birthday without them. And then you get into year 2 and it's like, man, they're still not here. And so I want to encourage you, Evans. I want to encourage you, man, because your intentionality of being such a loving husband and such a loving father and putting yourself in a place to serve your mother-in-law and your brother-in-law through this whole time, dude, like, you knew that you didn't need to be in the spotlight. You just knew that you needed to be a constant for them. And I know that that's not an easy thing to do, but man, like, I'm sure Eddie is up there like, that's my boy. Even though you weren't his blood son, but he's probably like, that's my boy.
I appreciate that, man. It's interesting, Chris. You and I know kind of how we're wired.
Yeah.
But to try to assist and be there in a different setting and try to make things better for them. and do the support role, right? To be the support role.
Yeah.
It was a blessing, man. It really was. But it's going into year 2. I don't know that it makes it any easier, but I told him the other day. I told everybody, I said, "Look, we year 1 was hard. We survived it. Eddie would be super ticked off if we ever thought about slowing down or not living life to the fullest. I mean, that's the reality of it. That's the truth of it. And so I think that's the reminder this year for me is that there's a lot of life that Eddie would want us to live, and man, especially in those boys, his grandsons. Oh my gosh, man. So how do we continue to honor him through our sons and who they become? I think that's extremely important.
It's good.
Yeah.
What would be one thing that you would give our audience as a piece of advice or wisdom when they're in the midst of where you've been and where you are right now?
I would say as the spouse, right? Let's start there. The spouse to someone who's lost a parent or a sister or someone very, very close. One of the hardest things was to watch them grieve, right? Because I can't fix it. You know, you and I talk about being fixers all the time. I can't fix it. And so that's tough, right? But to be able to lean in and give them the ability to fall to pieces, but also be able to discern when you need to pick them up. And Jamie and I have this conversation where I'm like, there are days you can lay in it. There's days I'm about to pull you out of it, right? Because our boys still need us at different ways at different times. Her mother may need something. Our community may need something. So being able to discern now is the time that I need to give you space and I need to do anything and everything I can to give you the opportunity to grieve. And there's other times where I need to pull you out of it because if you stay there, you're not living the life that your family member would tell you to do.
Would you like me to close this out in prayer, or would you like to close this out in prayer, bud?
I'd love for you to do it. Yeah. Do you mind doing it?
No, not at all. Not at all. Well, Lord, we just say thank you. Lord, we just enter your courts with praise. We thank you for the sweetness of what this life here on earth is. But we also thank you for what is beyond this, for what your son Jesus died on the cross to save us from sin, to save us from hell, and to bring us into eternity with you, Lord. So, Lord, I ask that anyone that is going through right now, that is listening to this podcast, listening to this episode, and has been in it, tearing up with Evans and me, that they would be okay sitting in that spot, that they would be okay knowing that you have them. So, Lord, I ask that you would just provide discernment, that you would provide wisdom, that you would provide counsel, and that you would provide comfort in a place where on earth it feels like a loss, but man, it is a celebration there in heaven with you as each new soul goes from passing from the physical world to the spiritual world. And Lord, those of us that are here helping guide our families through it, Lord, I ask that you would speak to us as husbands, as fathers, as men, as followers of Christ, to give us that extra measure of grace, that extra measure of empathy, and that we would see your hand in the midst of what seems like a tough time, but we would find that moment to celebrate the life as we continue to live our lives. So, Lord, thank you for fortifying us. Thank you for loving us, and thank you for strengthening us. And I ask that you be with us each day. Lord, in Jesus' name, amen. So, guys, this was a heavy episode. And Evans and I both knew that it was. But what we hope is that you heard two men talking about how you walk your family through grief, how you walk them through a loss of a loved one that leaves a residual impact on the rest of your life. This is what legacy is. This is how we build legacy, by celebrating what was done before so that we can be where we are and so that we can pour into the next. So, men, I challenge you, do not get stuck in the loss. Do not get stuck in the past, but focus on right now, on being in the present. And I promise you will be able to walk this out. You will come to the other side of this, because everything is a season. Everything has a beginning, middle, and end. Something's ending so that something else can begin. That is how God gives us a measure of the sweetness of life, and being here in this place to say, for a time such as this. We'll see you on our next episode.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Handle the Daily, where we conquer the day together so we can build legacy for tomorrow. If you found this episode impactful, share it with other men in your life. Make sure to subscribe to our podcast, like, download, and share. To stay up to date in all we are doing, visit our website handlethedaily.com and make sure to tune into our next episode. This podcast and its content is copyright of Thread Pull LLC. See Handle the Daily Podcast 2024, all rights reserved. Any redistribution or reproduction of part or all of the contents in any form is prohibited other than the following. We welcome you to download and play the podcast and share with others for personal use. Please acknowledge Threadpull LLC as the source of the material. You may not, except with our express written permission, distribute or commercially exploit the content. The information contained in this website and podcast is for general information purposes only. The information is provided by Handle, the Daily Podcast, and while we endeavor to keep the information up to date and correct, we make no representations or warranties of any kind, express or implied, about the completeness, accuracy, reliability, suitability, or availability with respect to the website or the information, products, services, or related graphics contained on the website for any purpose. Any reliance you place on such information is therefore strictly at your own risk. In no event will we be liable for any loss or damage, including without limitation, indirect, or consequential loss or damage, or any loss or damage whatsoever arising from loss of data or profits arising out of, or in connection with, the use of this website. Through this website, you are able to link to other websites which are not under the control of Threadpull LLC and Handle the Daily Podcast. We have no control over the nature, content, and availability of those sites. The inclusion of any links does not necessarily imply a recommendation or endorse the views expressed within them. Every effort is made to keep the website up and running smoothly. However, Threadpull LLC and Handle the Daily Podcast takes no responsibility for, and will not be liable for, the website being temporarily unavailable due to technical issues beyond our control.